All right, we are recording. We are hot. My name is Pittsburgh Pat, and I am here with Pete Geissler. Pete is an author, publisher, teacher, coach, and technical writer, and a longtime friend of mine. How have you been, Pete? It's great to see you in person again. Well, sort of.
I've been good, except I miss those Chopin martinis.
Yeah, yeah. I miss making them, Like it's good forearm exercise, shaking those martinis.
You and Tom Cruise.
Yeah, well, I wish I had half his money. But yeah, so maybe I'll get some of his notoriety. That's why I'm wearing these shades, So.
Okay. Well, I would hardly recognize you with those shades on.
He made those Ray-Ban shades like in Risky Business. People bought those for years. Talk about branding. Wow. So you're an author. I know you've written many books, but
Yeah.
there's one in particular that you wrote recently that has to do with the neck of the woods that I worked in, Allegheny City, or former Allegheny City, the north side of Pittsburgh. And it's about a guy named Ferris that our viewers might know. So tell us about this Mr. Ferris.
Well, your viewers might know the name, George
Yeah.
Ferris. It was George Ferris Jr., actually. You probably know the name, and you probably have ridden on a Ferris wheel, but you probably know nothing. Matter of fact, if you ride on a Ferris wheel, you probably don't even know that George Ferris, a guy by the name of George Ferris, actually invented it. And he got the idea only maybe 100 yards or so from where I'm sitting right now on the North Shore, depending upon how your GPS is working. George lived for 3 years within 100 feet of me, the entrance to Foster Square on the North Shore.
Oh, okay.
Or lived a quarter mile away up Arch Street. And there used to be a sign put up by the city of Pittsburgh, one of those blue and yellow signs that are historical markers up there on Arch Street. I think it was 1440 Arch Street. And the house is still there. And I don't know who's living in it now, but the address is still there. And, so George either lived within 100 feet or a quarter mile, of where I'm sitting at the moment. And he lived there for 3 years, only 3 years, when he first moved to Pittsburgh. And he moved to Pittsburgh by sheer accident. He was working for an engineering company, based in New York City. And he was doing surveying and steel inspection work on a bunch of bridges spanning the Monongahela and the other river down by Charleston, North Charleston, West Virginia.
So we had a bunch of bridges even back then.
Oh yeah, and they were just beginning to build them. When George lived here, he's only here for 3 years, but he formed a relatively large, at the time, engineering consulting company, which focused on testing of steel. And that's important, the testing of steel. And he had his offices in downtown Pittsburgh on Grant Street.
Huh.
And he would commute from North Shore to downtown, and it's over a wooden bridge. There was only one across the Allegheny at the time.
Somebody told me that wooden bridge, it was a toll bridge too. You had to pay like a nickel or something every time you went across. At one point in time, maybe not during Mr. Ferris's time, but
yeah, I have no recollection of my research.
That was how they financed the building of the bridge, was by charging a toll until the bridge was paid off, and then they stopped.
Well, see, nothing's changed except we stopped.
We wouldn't stop. It's like the turnpike. We wouldn't stop charging you for it, right?
When there's a flow of money to the politicians' coffers, the flow of money never stops. We're still taxing people for the Johnstown flood.
That's right.
That was 1860 or 1870, something like that. But anyway, he went into town, I assume, initially in the early 1880s, mid 1880s, by horse-drawn something. And he went to his offices on Grant Street. And he employed a significant number of people. I don't know exact number, but more than 10 and fewer than 100 probably.
Okay.
But he had it down here. And his specialty was testing of steel. And the testing, as I said, the testing was important because that got him out to Chicago. He got a contract to test the steel and other materials that were being used to build the Chicago World's Fair, also known as the Columbian Exposition,
Okay.
which opened up in 1893.
1893. Okay.
That was when it started, in June of 1893.
Yeah.
Grover Cleveland, for you young folks like you, yeah, Pat. Grover
We
Cleveland,
all love Grover. He got 2 terms non-consecutive. We all remember him, right?
you know, yeah, well, thank God for you. But Grover Cleveland cut the ribbon on the Columbian Exposition.
Wow. Hey, so what years did Tom Ferris live in Pittsburgh? Do you?
Well, only 3 years, 18. Oh my heavens, I had it in my head.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to put you on the
That's
spot, but is
okay.
it right around 1892? Because I think that's the time when Max's was built and operated as a
What was built then?
Max's Allegheny Tavern.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah.
Building
Yeah,
was a
Max's-
drover's market.
Max's was the Farmers and Drovers Hotel at the time.
Right.
Okay. And I have in the book, okay, in the book, The Rise and Fall of
Oh
George.
yeah, show us your book. So this book can be purchased on Amazon for everyone who's watching. I'll have a link below. But oh, what a great cover!
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, look who, see, it was written by Pete Geissler and Jeff Geissler.
Lift it up a little bit more. We can't see your names. You put Jeff's name on there as well.
Oh yeah, sure. You see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic.
See,
Great.
I did the text and the research, and Jeff did the design.
Jeff's
Yeah,
an
he did.
amazing designer. I used one of his designs as my I guess you call it an avatar on my my YouTube channel. Yeah.
Jeff did a great job with
He's
designing.
a fantastic artist.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll put a
And he-
link in the description below of his conversation as well.
Yeah, sure.
So Ferris lived in Pittsburgh around early 1890s.
No, he came here, let's say in the mid 1880s.
Mid 1880s.
80s, yeah.
Lived here
he
for
was
3
in-
years.
And then he was only in Allegheny City for 3 years.
Okay.
And then he moved to Chicago to take care of the he had this big contract
Yeah.
to test all the materials. The Columbian Exposition was the largest construction project in the world at the time.
Huh.
And it's huge. If you look at the book, there's a picture of the mechanics building. And the mechanics building was so big, it had its own weather.
Ah,
I mean, it was huge, countless numbers of square feet. And the pictures in the book.
I've heard that like Zeppelin hangars had their own weather.
They do.
So that was
They
the
do.
same thing. So when they were building these giant like structures out of steel or whatever they were, that they had to have these huge indoor spaces in order to do that.
Yep. And these are huge indoor spaces.
And clouds would form in the spaces.
Exactly.
Do you think that had anything to do with human breath or like what the humidity, obviously, but like who knows? That's so fascinating though. Yeah.
Well, it was so big that the clouds couldn't miss the buildings.
Hey,
Anyway, the buildings out there were huge. As I said, it was the largest construction project in the history at the time. Probably not right now, but anyway, it was the largest at the time.
yeah.
And let me tell you how George got going on the Ferris wheel, if you want me to do that.
Please. Yeah, that would be fascinating.
George was out in Chicago checking up on his business out there, right? He had some people out there, testing. Okay, when the Columbian Expedition was being designed and built. The manager of the entire project was a famous architect called Daniel Burnham. And Daniel Burnham did some stuff in Pittsburgh here too, including the Frick building. But he did half a dozen buildings here in Pittsburgh. But he was world renowned as a wonderful architect and city planner. He planned the entire city of Chicago, not to mention Osaka, and a couple. Well, don't call me on Osaka, but a couple of cities in Japan as well.
Well, if he planned Pittsburgh, he probably shouldn't take credit for that because half of this town.
Planned Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I
did a
don't think
couple
anybody
buildings.
planned Pittsburgh.
Nobody planned. Yeah, they did. They did. Pat.
Yeah, they did.
I gotta contradict you. The
Yeah.
horses that were driving around, planned Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Our roads are the old horse paths.
Sure
That's a
feels
true-
like it when you drive downtown, you know?
That's a true statement, yeah. Okay. Well, the rivers planned it too, we had to,
Yeah, the topography dictated what you could and could not do.
that's right. We were parallel to the rivers. So all of our roads kind of fall into a triangle.
Triangles. Yeah.
But anyway, George was out in Chicago on a business trip. And he went to a luncheon that was called by Daniel Burnham. Okay. And in that luncheon, there were like 100 people who were involved in the Columbian Exposition. And Daniel Burnham gave a speech. And George was there, right? Daniel Burnham said, we're behind schedule. I mean, this is a construction project, will you? I mean, no kidding, okay? Anyway, we're behind schedule.
When's the last time we were ahead of schedule?
Yeah. You have to ask Pat about, when I say Pat, Pittsburgh, transit. But anyway, he looked at the architects that were there and he said, you architects have done a wonderful job. Of course, Danto's an architect now. He wasn't biased at all, right? Hardly. And he said, you architects have done a wonderful job. Congratulations. This is going to be fabulous. Love you, everything you've done. But you engineers, wow, you are so far behind. I wouldn't believe it. Okay. And George is sitting there at a table, listening to himself and all these dozens of engineers that were with him being berated for not keeping up with the project schedule. So then Daniel Burnham said the fateful words. We, the people who are involved in the Columbian Expedition, need to build something that is more of an icon than the Eiffel Tower, which opened up 3 years before.
Yeah, I was wondering how that was going to tie in because
that was going to tie in.
Yeah,
we need to be more impressive than Eiffel. We need to out Eiffel. Okay.
Sure.
And George said, and then Daniel Burnham said, you submitted some suggestions, towers that look a lot like Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do that. So we have an Eiffel Tower that's 10 feet bigger. That's not what we want.
That doesn't do us any good, right?
That doesn't do anything. So George sat there and he actually, according to the book, got the idea and sketched it out on a napkin. You know how all of us sketch out things while we're having lunch, okay?
Or martinis.
Or all that, or you can't have lunch without a martini.
Well, I mean, it makes a perfect circle on the glass on the napkin,
There you go. Anyway, George gets this idea, okay? And he after his lunch, he walks back to his offices, okay? And he runs into Burnham. This is now my fiction, okay? The rest of it is the truth. All that was true.
Okay.
And he said, Mr. Burnham, you'll remember me. My name is George Ferris, and I have an idea. And Daniel Burnham said, I'd look forward to seeing you. So for the next month, George conceptually designed a steel, first in the world, Ferris wheel that was more than 1,200 feet in diameter.
Wow.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's a monster.
It's a monster.
So do you think maybe his design came from the ring on his napkin from his cocktail?
Maybe.
So this is where, before we get into like the fiction, it's my understanding that the whole reason that the Eiffel Tower was built was to reach a structure that reached the height that was greater than the Great Pyramid in Egypt, right?
Whoa, that could be, yeah.
I think that was the first one. And the French had a fascination with Egypt ever since Napoleon led an expedition there. And so they took surveyors and measurements and all this sort of thing. But it's also my understanding that the Eiffel Tower was meant to be dismantled at some point. And that it became and there were a lot of people at the time that thought it was an eyesore on the skyline of Paris. Now it's an icon, right?
Yeah, it is.
So Burnham is looking for an icon. And he decides, I've got the greatest structural engineer, or I've got, all of these guys together at once. I might as well do this now,
And he threw down the challenge. He said, we got to do something more impressive than Eiffel.
Yeah.
Now, Gustav Eiffel was a fabulous structural engineer.
Yeah.
And he actually submitted a design for a tower for the Columbian Exposition. But, we don't need 2 Eiffel Towers.
Well, somebody's always going to beat you. I mean, they're just going to put another flagpole up there. Or they're going to do something. I mean, it still happens today.
Exactly right.
Bonus towers,
Exactly right.
and yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where's the tallest building in the world? It used to be the Empire State Building in
I
New
think
York.
it's Malaysia now, isn't it? Malaysia, or is it in Abu Dhabi now?
Abu Dhabi, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
there's
a
always this
beautiful building.
competition that keeps going, and then the Chinese get in there sometimes, and yeah, the world's tallest structures. But so in a small country like Malaysia or Singapore, I should say, or Abu Dhabi, it makes sense because you don't have a lot of land area, so you got to build up kind of. But at some point, it's just it's just megalomania. At some point, it's just how high. It's hubris. It's how high can we do this? Like, what can we really do?
Well, the reason, I'm going to go back to George for a second, but
Please. We need to get back to George.
Well, it's just tied into the reason that we can build, the whole world can build skyscrapers, we're getting bigger and higher and all that stuff, is because George opened up a whole bunch of new engineering principles with his Ferris wheel that were applicable to buildings. The first steel structured buildings were in Chicago, and they were based on George's design to a great extent. Okay. George not only designed the first Ferris wheel, he was also very instrumental in designing skyscrapers. Okay. Excuse me.
Well, without an elevator, skyscrapers are no good. So you got to have that technology, right?
Well, at the same time, Mr. Otis, outside of New York City, was building his elevators. Okay. Well, the Eiffel Tower had an elevator.
Yeah, you get in an elevator today, you still see his name.
What's that?
You get into an elevator today, there's a good chance you're going to read his name on a panel.
You're going to have an Otis elevator.
Yeah, he was revolutionary.
But when the Eiffel Tower opened too, the elevator was not quite finished, so people walked up to some height, and not all the way to the top.
Right.
But only a few, maybe 50 or 80 feet or something like that. But they got a good view of Paris. But they actually walked up the steps.
Yeah, there's I mean, now you can go way top and you have a ceremonial glass of champagne or ginger ale, depending on your preference. And then there's a restaurant on the first level that's like, world renowned. And, that's just like, there's Parisians that just like, yeah, we'll just go eat there. It's like, top of the triangle, if you remember.
Sure, I remember that well. Yeah.
Remember that? I used to eat at the top of the triangle like once
me
every
too. It was a Stouffer's.
Yeah, that's right. And but that was a special occasion restaurant.
And it revolved.
Yes.
So you could get a 360-degree view of the magnificent downtown Pittsburgh.
I miss the revolving restaurants. I don't know if there's any more. I think maybe the Space Needle in
Seattle.
Seattle, maybe the CN Tower in Toronto, but that's shaped like it looks like it would revolve. But yeah, that's not a thing anymore. But that was pretty cool. I always liked that. Yeah. So
anyway, George was in Chicago, and he got his ideas in Chicago, and then he refined the idea. George was so smart that he hired a guy by the name of Greneau right out of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where George graduated, and Greneau became the detail designer of the first steel Ferris wheel. If you'll notice on the Ferris wheel, it's the first one is built like a bicycle wheel with spokes. Okay, and Burnham, when he looked at the design, said to George, "Nobody will ride this. It looks like it's going to collapse." And Burnham said, "It will collapse." And then George made one of his big mistakes in life. He looked at Daniel Burnham and said, "You're an architect. Stick to architecture. I'm an engineer. I know what I'm doing." In other words, George said, "You are a dummy, okay, when it comes to design. This will not fall down." Okay. So anyway, George built this thing and it looked like a spider web. Okay. There are thousands of pieces that were fabricated to build this. And they were all designed by Greneau. And Greneau's a big part of the book. And Greneau was as good an engineer as George. So anyway, he built the first one. And at the opening, you said Champagne. There were thousands of people at the opening. By the way, the first Ferris wheel carried more than 2,000 people, 2,133, I think.
1,000 people at one time.
Time, yeah.
Whew.
And you paid your cents and you got 2 revolutions.
How much did it cost?
Excuse me?
How much did it cost?
50 cents.
50
Back today,
cents?
it's probably $5 at least.
Yeah, that was not insignificant money.
It was very significant, yeah. And you got on the thing, you got on in the carts, and the carts were basically very comfortable seats, and they served champagne. Okay. And you could, in the beginning anyway.
Yeah.
And the first ride, the first rotation was stop and start because everybody was loaded. Okay. But the second rotation was uninterrupted.
Nice.
More than 2,000 people. And there was a person in there in the beginnings anyway, who was serving champagne and pointing out the sights. This was the first time in the history of Chicago, probably in the history of any city, that people could actually look at their city from above, the view. You could not do it before that.
This is like the equivalent of like an astronaut being launched into orbit and being able to see the Earth, the curvature of the Earth, or the Apollo astronauts, that famous Apollo, I think it's Apollo 8. They come back and you see the Earth, that picture, classic picture of the Earth.
Yep.
In the firmament. That's amazing. Yeah.
Well, they got their first look at Chicago from the top down.
I'd pay $5 for that.
Yeah, yeah, but you're rich.
50 cents. Yeah. I tell you, just while we're on the champagne thing for one second, I have a friend, he used to operate the Icy Light beer can balloon. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I've seen it.
Yeah, it was shaped like that back in the 70s, I think it was, or maybe the 80s. I think it was the 80s. And they'd go out to Arizona and go to the balloon festivals all over and whatnot. He told me that the early balloonists in France, that's where the Montgolfier brothers invented the balloon that we know of as like the first structural safe balloon. And they would carry champagne in the gondola, and that became a tradition. But the original legend is that they carried champagne so that when they sat down in a farmer's backyard, they served the champagne to the owner of the property to prove that they weren't aliens, humans.
Yeah.
Because humans can make champagne, right? We're French, we make champagne. So here, this is how we prove we're Earthlings and not from the stars. Isn't that interesting? I love that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true, but I love it anyway, Like we always say in fiction writing, never let the truth get in the way of a good story, right? But this is all factually based, what you were doing.
Oh yeah, I'm telling you the truth. I'm guessing it.
The truth is the truth, but trying to get as close to it as possible, sure, through historical research.
But yeah, in the ribbon cutting was in June of 1893, and it was a month late. And don't forget this: the Columbian Exposition was designed. The purpose of it was to celebrate Columbus's discovery.
I see. So 1892, the
1492
year.
I'm not a good mathematician, but is that 400 years?
Yeah, it sure is.
Okay, and of course, the Columbian Exposition itself was a year late, and George's Ferris wheel was a month later. It was Columbian Exposition was supposed to open May, but the Ferris wheel opened up in June. In June. Yeah. Now, at that point, George was at his height of engineering power. Okay. And at that point, he had an apartment in Chicago, but he lived on Grant Street, where his offices were. He had moved out of Allegheny City or the North Shore, and he lived on Grant Street near his offices. But he was at the height when the first Ferris wheel did his first
I'll
turn.
bet. The word probably spread like wildfire about this.
Internationally, he got telegrams from all the world. You know, what a great thing, absolutely. So anyway, he and his wife, Margaret, were just absolutely ecstatic about this whole thing. And they were celebrating George's celebrity. You know, he was now the best known engineer probably in the world. Okay. And anyway, he was high on the hog there. And then in July, I'm not going to give you the name because it'll ruin it, but
okay, yeah, don't ruin the book for anybody.
yeah, a guy, well, because I can't remember it either. But a guy who had opened up a wooden Ferris wheel at Atlantic City, okay, that George had visited many years before. This guy who opened up the wooden club sued George for patent infringement. Believe it or not, they had patents in those days.
Oh yeah.
And the suit was in July, a month after he was on the top of the world. Now he became the bottom of the world. The suit lasted more than a year. And at the end of the year, there was no basis for the suit, by the way. Let me start at the beginning. Absolutely no basis for the suit.
Okay.
Totally different designs. Okay. And after a year, the judge, in all his wisdom, awarded George something like $25, okay, which back in those days was probably $100. And George was totally broke. He spent his money on lawyers. Well, back in those days, he spent too much money on lawyers and not enough on living, just like today. So anyway, George was broke.
So the wheel turned. He went from the top of the wheel all the way to the bottom in a month.
In a month.
What month? Riches to rags.
Huh?
Riches to rags in 1 month.
Well, it took him, the beginning of rags was in 1 month,
beginning of it. Yeah.
but it took another year before he actually was broke.
Was he a spender? No, he wasn't.
He was frugal, and his wife
frugal. Okay,
gotcha. Yeah. So, meanwhile, Daniel Burnham is doing everything he can to ruin George, which is in the book. Daniel Burnham
on that earlier resentment that.
Oh yeah, that's the first.
That resentment. Wow.
Resentment started coming up, and then it started coming up even further. Daniel Burnham ordered George to build a fence around his Ferris wheel. And George said, nope. I'm not going to build that fence. I'm going to build the fence I designed in there. And Burnham got pissed off again. Okay. So
these guys did not get along.
They did not get along. Okay. So George fought this lawsuit, and he did another couple things. He decided that he could open up a park, playland park, park with rides and stuff.
Yeah.
In north of Chicago. And he found some investors, including the guy who was featured in the book by Theodore Dreiser, the tycoon. Okay, it was a trilogy. Very great books if anybody wants to read those. They're very wonderful books. Anyway, he got this guy who was fantastically rich. He owned the transit companies in Chicago, and he built a park north of Chicago with a restaurant in a building that was on the same level as one of the cars or some of the cars at the Ferris wheel. So George dismantled the Ferris wheel, reassembled it at that park, and he lost a hell of a lot more money for various reasons, again, based on lawsuits. So somebody else said, let's move it to St. Louis, to the St. Louis Exposition.
Right. What year was that?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask that.
Well, the only reason I asked that is because that comes up in Max's all the time.
Yes.
This is a restaurant where like we've met. Well, we met before that, but where we've known each other in the last 15 years. There's this fabulous bar behind the back bar is what I call it. It's the bar you look at. It's not the bar you lean against.
Okay.
That has all the liquor on it, the big giant mirrors. And there's a rumor, the tradition is that bar comes from the St. Louis Exposition.
That's true. It's the rumors in the book. Okay. And I wanted Jeff to take a picture of it. He said he wouldn't, but I don't know why.
There are so many pictures of that bar. There was an article done in the Post-Gazette probably 5 or 6 years ago, and they did the top 20 most beautiful or iconic or unique bars, and that was in there for sure. The one at James Street with the lions, I don't know if it was lions heads or panther heads, like holding the brass rail, that was in there. So there's a lot of neat North Side, like iconic.
There are.
Yeah,
and
bars.
You and I know all the bars.
Unfortunately, I have to admit that I do.
I don't think it's unfortunate at all. I think it's unfortunate that the pandemic came along and stopped me from going out.
There's so many. This is a transformative time to be certain. Yeah, there are pluses and minuses for sure.
Well, anyway, George.
Yeah.
Not George, but another guy who was very famous for George, an engineer who was in the book, reassembled it down in St. Louis. And it was a big hit in St. Louis, and it made a lot of money.
I bet.
But after the St. Louis Expedition was over, and then Judy Garland made a great movie about it, Meet Me in St. Louis. Oh, yeah. I'd sing for you, but that would clear the room in a hurry.
Well, we get a copyright strike. They don't like when you like steal people's music. We can talk about anything we want. We can plagiarize, we can quote Shakespeare, but for some reason you can't hum a tune without YouTube saying, you got to pay ASCAP for that or something. So
well, I won't hum the tune then. But everybody knows Meet Me in St. Louis.
But that expression,
Meet Me in St. Louis.
Yeah, that expression, Meet Me in St. Louis comes up all the time. Like when you watch older movies, that must have been a really popular movie at the time.
Well, it was. Judy Garland made it famous.
Yeah.
And, the trolley song, ding, 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 went the trolley.
Yes, I do know that.
That was in the.
That's from that. Oh, okay.
But anyway, the St. Louis Exposition was bigger, bigger than the Columbian Exposition. Came around more than 10 years later, and the Ferris wheel was again the major attraction. But after it was over, George was dead, by the way.
When did George die?
What's that?
When did George die?
In the late 1890s, and he died right here in Pittsburgh.
How old was he?
At Mercy Hospital. Of typhoid fever, according to the death certificate.
Typhoid fever. Well, he was was he in his 50s or
37 years of age?
37.
37.
Yeah. Wow.
But he basically died broke, and he died broken, and his friend abandoned him, and most importantly, that rotten person Daniel Burnham abandoned him when George needed money, and Burnham was loaded with the stuff. Burnham went over to Europe on a vacation with his wife and died over there of the strange gastro disease. And I hope he suffered something terrible.
Karma. He died of karma. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, we've brought to awareness, a high level awareness of infectious diseases as of late. But back then, man, that was a thing. I mean, like you didn't have any defense against it. Louis Pasteur is not around yet. That whole thing. But so just doing a little quick math, Ferris is in his late 20s when he designs the Ferris wheel. Wow, what a mind!
He was a great engineer. He really was.
I'll bet.
Right.
Bet.
He was so great. If I can jump to this, in 1996, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute put a plaque in their Hall of Fame, Engineers Hall of Fame, and you can go up there and read about him in that building up there. They have a building that's set aside for this.
How long did it take you to research this book before you decided, like, pen to paper? Or were you researching as you were writing? I'm kind of curious about your process a little bit.
Well, I researched it enough to know that I'd like to write the book.
Right.
And Jeff urged me to write the book. So I got into it. And the more I got into it, the more I realized that George is an unsung hero,
Yes.
big time. And I walked around the North Shore and I asked half a dozen people, do you know George Ferris? He lived here. Okay. And I got head scratches.
Yeah.
A couple people said, did he invent the? I don't know why. I got that. Nobody could say definitively that this is the guy who invented the first Ferris wheel. And now we have, thousands around the world, maybe. And they're all most of them are based on George's design.
Well, that's how you know you have a good topic, because you have a vacuum of knowledge there that you can fill. But you also said it was, I remember we talked over the bar a couple of times. You said that, or you were coming in, to meet your agent or whatnot. And you say, like, that there was a scarcity of source material. Like, some of this, there, you could find out certain facts, but you couldn't pin down certain dates and times. And
yeah, there was a certain scarcity, but not of the major dates.
right.
And there's a great scarcity about George's wife.
Yeah,
George's wife was a major influence on George
I'm sure.
and a major supporter. Okay. But when George, and I don't want to criticize Margaret at all, believe me, Margaret came from Canton, Ohio. But when George was sued and became bereft of money, and also his health started to deteriorate, Margaret, at George's urgings, left George and went home to her mother.
I see.
In Canton, Ohio, and stayed there for some indeterminate period of time, and then died in the 1930s, 20s, 30s, in Richmond, California, where she was managing a boarding house.
I see.
And so she went from riches to rags as well.
Yeah.
The death certificate says that she died of a heart attack. She was in her 50s, and maybe she did, but she died alone, like George died alone. When Margaret found out that George had died, she rushed back to Pittsburgh and tried to claim his ashes, and also to find out if there was anything in his will that she could claim. The answer to both of those is no.
Yeah.
The ashes were kept by Sampson Funeral Home, which I think is still here out in Pittsburgh, out near the Oakland area. Okay. And Sampson wouldn't give Margaret the ashes because she wasn't the closest relative at that time. George's brother was.
Oh.
And there was nothing left in as far as money goes. For Margaret
there was no estate.
There was no estate. So
before we started rolling the cameras, you wanted to mention Dan Rooney's book.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
This, when it comes to sourcing material for Allegheny City, this is a fabulously well-researched book.
Dan Rooney and Carol Peterson.
Yeah, Carol, I don't know Carol Peterson. I think she's a local freelance writer. And she and Dan got together and wrote this book, and it is amazing. Amazingly.
And this is Dan Rooney of the Pittsburgh Steelers fame.
Yep, he's born in 1932. And I think he's still alive. He lives down the street from me. You know that? He
used to come in on Sunday for brunch after church. Not every Sunday, but many Sundays, and driving his very unassuming 15-year-old Nissan Maxima, just not Jerry Jones, that's for sure. Not the typical athletic team owner, very humble, very friendly, super friendly. I mean, when people, he's an icon, so he's very recognizable around here. But when people would approach him, so gracious. I never heard anything but good things about the man. So, and
he
historian.
What's that?
And now I find out he's a local historian as well.
He is. Well, I think Carol, the freelance writer, probably did a great deal of the work here. But anyway, Dan lives in a house only, let's say, a quarter mile from me, down near where the fast food places are.
Sure.
And he did a great job of remodeling it. He spent some years down living in the South Hills, but he didn't like it down. He was too far away from his team, too far away from his activities. So he bought this house and remodeled it. Beautiful job. Good. It's right next to the Thor Mansion.
Which mansion?
You know where the Thor, William Thor?
Thor.
On North Lincoln Avenue.
Thor is the guy who paid for the lens in one of the telescopes at the Allegheny Observatory. The Thor telescope is named after him. Yes, sir. I can't imagine it's not the same Thor. Because then millionaires used to collect observatories. That was a thing back then. That was a thing that you did, like people own sports teams now. They would sponsor observatories, and I just happened to go. I really enjoyed but of course the lectures that they would have at the observatory. So I would go once a month, and my friends would let me look through a telescope. It was great. But yeah, the Thor telescope, I'm pretty sure, is named after him. He was a rich benefactor of that.
Well, he's really famous for the movie The Girl on the Velvet Swing. Okay, Evelyn Nesbit. William Thor we got into architects. He's the one who walked into Madison Square Garden and shot Sanford White in plain sight of everybody. And then he got off because he was insane. But if you shoot somebody in plain sight, you are insane.
I guess. I mean, I would imagine so.
The Thor Mansion is still down there, and it's in the book. Okay, can I show this? Okay. There it is. Where is it? Can you see it?
I know exactly where that is.
Yeah, sure. Well, Dan Rooney lives next door.
Yeah.
The Thor Mansion was a home. It's now apartments for an art studio.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I used to do some work down there for them.
Well, that's a great tie-in. I actually have a pottery studio, so
But anyway,
that's great.
Thor was there, and George. Here, can I show you this?
Please.
This is in Rooney's book. Here's a cover art. Can you see it? I can't see it.
Lift it up. There you go.
Okay. That's George. Now,
well, I was looking at the lady.
Looking at the ladies? No, look at.
Sorry, that's where my mind goes.
Over here.
All right, George has the amazing mustache.
Yeah. This is the only known photograph of George, and we use it on the cover of the book too, of course.
So how old is George? All right, in that photograph, how old do you think George is?
Oh, well, this is 1890. But this was taken for a promotional brochure for the Columbian Exposition.
Okay, so he's maybe 30 years old or so.
He was 30, probably early 30s.
Okay, gotcha.
He was probably 5 or 6 or 7 years away from dying.
Well,
but it's the only known photograph, and there are no photographs whatsoever of his wife, Margaret, who was described as beautiful, intelligent, articulate, dark-haired, dark-eyed. Everybody, the journalists, just fell head over heels to get close to her.
Maybe that's why. Maybe she was never photographed.
She gave a speech at the opening and at the ribbon cutting, and gave a lot of credit to George. And matter of fact, she blew, to start the first rotation, she blew what was the golden whistle, which is probably brass. She blew a golden whistle for the operating engineer to start the rotation.
Oh, that's nice. It's like a lady back to champagne, break the bottle of champagne to launch a ship. That's fantastic.
At the opening, the band from the Indiana University, one of the Indiana universities, played "My Country 'Tis of Thee" and "Star Spangled Banner," patriotic stuff.
Yeah.
The whole Ferris wheel was covered with red, white, and blue bunting. it was a very patriotic time.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and, it was, little did we know that we were going into one of the worst recessions in the history of the world. But anyway, it was a wonderful time, and there were thousands of people there.
I remember when I studied history, they called it the Gilded Age.
It was.
Yeah. Well, it's been an amazing time, a belle epoque.
What's that?
La Belle Epoque.
Yes. Yes.
I did a little bit of historical research when I was in high school. Actually, I did a historical research project to kind of pad my resume for college, but it ended up being really fun. And one of the things we did, we investigated old Allegheny City, and me and my small group of friends who were involved in that, we found a political cartoon. See, Allegheny City and Pittsburgh were twin cities, kind of like Minneapolis, St. Paul. I know you know that, but for the audience, it doesn't. So what happened was the industrial city, the city itself was Pittsburgh. That's where all the mills were, and the people that owned those things lived in the affluent suburbs just north of the river, and it was really nice, But it was also like a great tax base. So there was political motivation for Pittsburgh to acquire that tax base. So there was a referendum. There were several, I think, but there was the final referendum when the cities merged. It was in 1907, I believe, and we found a political cartoon, and the political cartoon showed a big, hulking, burly groom with a sash that said Pittsburgh, dragging a very reluctant, small, diminutive, blushing bride with a sash that said Allegheny to the altar, and it was very representative, I think, of the mood at the time, at least by the artist. But it's amazing how like that kind of work can bring you into a moment, And I think with this book that you've written, you've captured moments that may otherwise have been lost, and you've been able to put those together. And I think it's something that will be.
The George Ferris book talks about the merger and how it was the residents of Allegheny City tried to stop it.
Yes.
Because they said, look, taxes are going to go up because of this, and we don't need many more taxes. Things haven't changed a bit.
Nope.
Changed a bit. Okay?
Nope.
So
we're all the same.
But I put it. I have a few paragraphs in the Ferris book, but Dan Rooney has a lot about it. In fact, I think it's a whole chapter about how the people here resisted.
Sure.
Merging in Pittsburgh, and here we are, more than a century later, and we can't secede.
There was no secession clause in there. No,
there was no secession.
No, we're not Texas. We can't secede from the Union, or South Carolina. Actually, has nothing to do with local history. But at one point during the Civil War, South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union in 1861, right after the election of Abraham Lincoln. So, at one point during the Confederacy, the South Carolina didn't like something that was going on in Richmond. So there was a proposal to secede from the Confederacy.
I'll be damned.
So like here, how radical can you get? So there's this famous, I can't remember the name of the diarist. I don't know if he was a politician, but he wrote in his journal, he said, he said, we cannot do this. South Carolina is too small to be a republic and too large to be an insane asylum.
Okay.
Isn't that a wonderful line?
That's a good line.
Yeah. So, well, thanks, Pete. I think this is a wrap. I loved what you had to say. I'm so happy that we got a chance to do this.
Yeah, me too. Thank you very much.
Is there anything you want to add at the end here? Is there anything we missed? I mean, I feel like I know George now, better than I did.
Well, I hope all your viewers know George better too. Yeah.
Well, this will be on the interwebs for posterity, so they'll be able to refer to it, and I'll have a link to the book below, and we'll do that. And thanks again. So,
okay.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay.